So we are beginning lymphatic system and immunity today. They're really kind of two separate things, but the lymphatic system plays a role in immunity, so that's why they group them together. But there is not an immune system like all the other systems, cardiovascular and nervous, right? They kind of just lump it in together. The study guide is up on Schoology. Owen is going to grab it for us right now. So as soon as he comes back, we'll pass it out to you. Fairly straightforward as far as what we're doing. Yes, come. Thank you. Yeah, it's fine. We'll get them next time. That's fine. Again, it's on Schoology. You can look at it, download it. It's there present for you. But I'll give you the actual written piece later or tomorrow. Excuse me. Your test, I will show them to you tomorrow. Yeah, I wanted to make sure we had one solid day of work today. We'll go from there. Especially with you guys getting ready to be gone, I wanted to make sure. They will be up on Schoology, on RenWeb today as well. All right, so let's jump in to this lymphatic system is what we start with today. Hello. I will. Sorry, I didn't do that. I'll put it up there. My apologies. Okay, so the lymphatic system is one of the funkier systems in the fact that it's not very well known, right? So now this is done. That's fine. We'll get it. It's not very well known. It doesn't have any big major organs that everyone's like, oh yeah, the heart, that's the cardiovascular system, right? There is not really anything big like that for the lymphatic system. Yes, you have the spleen. Yes, you have the thymus, but it doesn't really do a lot. And again, some of those even decrease as you get older and older. So what's the point of a lymphatic system? It's all about transporting fluid. And you say, wait, isn't that what the blood does? Isn't the blood fluid? Okay, it's about transporting every fluid other than blood. Does that make sense? And it does that through these vessels, just like veins, basically, the very thin-walled kind of veins. The lymph vessels, and it moves those things throughout and dumps them back where? Do you know where the circulation ends for the lymph system? It ends back into the veins. It actually dumps back into the veins very close to the heart that then go back into that right side of the heart, the right atrium. Right, so we're talking about this interstitial fluid, the fluid that's between the cells or around cells. No, it's a different something than plasma. And we'll talk much more about what it is, as we go through here. Okay? Again, the lymphatic vessels, they collect and they carry this excess fluid away from the spaces between cells. That's what interstitial means, in between the cells, those in-between places. And it dumps them, again, back into the circulatory system. And again, the reason why we tied into the immunity piece is because the organs of the lymph system do help with immunity. They help fight against diseases. So, let's dive in here. I think that's the next slide, right? Lymphatic pathways? Yes. So, just like the circulatory system, the lymph vessels start out as little capillaries. These tiny little, almost single-celled vessels that are taking in this interstitial fluid. And those capillaries then merge to form larger vessels. Those larger vessels merge to form even bigger vessels. And we keep going. Again, just like the circulatory system. That lymphatic capillaries, these guys are literally right in between or right near the capillaries that are bringing blood to the cells. And they're getting this lymph fluid. That's what that interstitial fluid, that fluid that is around the cells, is what we call lymph. So let's go back into the circulatory system. This is from, this picture is actually from last chapter, the circulatory system. Remember that we have the blood flow coming in to these little capillaries here. And here, the blood has a very higher pressure, and I'm saying high in quotes, compared to this side of that, right? Because again, the arteries have more pressure than the veins. Are you with me? Because there's more pressure here, it tends to push things out of that side of the capillary. So what kind of stuff does it push out? Talk to me. What kind of stuff is it pushing out on this side? No, again, what is the blood bringing to cells? Oxygen, good, that's the big thing, right? But also nutrients, right? Any of your vitamins or your minerals or all the proteins or all the 1,000 things you learned that are in the blood, right? This pressure tends to push that out. Does that make sense? The osmotic pressure, if you go way back in our second unit when we talked about how things move, right? Osmotic pressure is the flow of water, right? Based upon the concentrations. Do you remember way back in the day? Okay? And the osmotic pressure is tending to pull things in, right? But when you combine the outward force from the blood flow and the inward force from the osmotic pressure, you end up with a net push out. So again, that's why it takes all the stuff in the blood and moves it out of the capillaries to the cells that are here, but also into this in-between space. Does that make sense? And then on the other side of that, on the further end of that capillary, again, we still have the outward flow from the heart pumping, but now it's moved far enough away that that is less, right? And you still have that osmotic pressure that's flowing in, so therefore you get more stuff moving into the capillaries. And what kind of stuff comes into the capillaries? The waste, the lymph fluid, carbon dioxide, right? So that's how the blood is exchanged in these capillaries, right? And you notice up here, you probably didn't even notice it in the last chapter, but there's a little lymph capillary here. And what that's kind of doing is, I think of it almost like a vacuum. It's vacuuming up that extra fluid that isn't used by the cells. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question? Mm-hmm.
Right. So then, how does the stuff, like when it's so far away and all this stuff seeps into the blood, that's all the waste coming out, right?
On the blue side, you're saying? Mm-hmm. That would be the waste coming into the capillaries. Yeah. By the way, this picture is on page 368 in your textbook. Again, from the last chapter, page 368.
So then, how does the good stuff that, like the nutrients, get to the part where it's always pushing out?
So, I mean, the nutrients are coming right here because the blood flow is coming on this side over to here. So on this side of things, there's enough pressure from the heart that makes those nutrients want to go out. The osmotic pressure is the pressure of the arteries pumping is also pushing those fluids out. And again, the nutrients will just hitch a ride on the water pieces.
So once the nutrients get in, it'll travel to all the other.
Right, because you get all the cells that are right here. So the nutrients will come right out and boom, the cells are going to grab them and get what they need.
What about the cells on the blue side?
Again, they'll get some. Again, you've got some of that fluid that flows and brings stuff all over here, right? So it's not just those guys that get it, but yeah. You see that there's little holes, right, in the capillaries? Again, think of it like, you ever seen one of those hoses that they like punch little holes in and you get like the nice little spray that comes out? That's exactly what these capillaries are. They're vessels that have holes in them. And when the pressure's up on this side, everything comes out. And when the pressure's lower on that side, things come in. Does that make sense? Because again, that's the key. That is the functional unit of the circulatory system, is this capillary network. We didn't spend as much time talking about that last chapter, so I wanted to make sure to mention it today. And again, the lymph system, these lymph capillaries are just intertwined. Like this is a nice capillary bed, right? Where again, blood coming in on the red side, coming out on the blue side, and these green lymph vessels are all intertwined. Now, by the way, they aren't actually red, blue, and green in the body, okay? There's a great picture that was in your textbook, like actually of what they look like. They all look the same. So actually, when we do, when you get your specimens, often we'll have them inject it with this rubber silicone stuff that will actually show you, okay, the red ones are veins, are arteries, the blue ones are veins. You can actually get a yellow injection that shows the lymph system. Because again, it's very difficult to tell them apart just by looking at them. We cool? All right, so oh yes ma'am.
How does she find
So that's just not a dead something. You can put in different radioactive isotopes in your body that then looking through different machines, we can actually see those isotopes. There's a little glow and be all shiny on the actual pictures. But no, I wouldn't just inject the rubber into you to see it. Just be dead things. Oh, sure, right. I hope so. Because surgeons would have to, I mean, it would be a big thing if you couldn't tell whether it was an artery or whether it was a lymph. So again, that was only for some things that are dead. I should have made that clear. It's only for dead specimens that we do that. Yeah. There are other tools we can use, other isotopes or things we can inject, dyes that will show up on X-ray or other kind of things. But no, for human people, they tend to not like rubber in their arteries. Yeah. All right, these lymphatic vessels, again, like I said, very similar to veins. Very thin-walled. They do have valves, though, which makes sense because the pressure is so low. There's hardly any actual pressure in these lymph vessels. So therefore, you want valves to keep things from just flowing right back to the opposite direction. And you may say, well, and how? Because there's nothing to pump. Are you with me? There's no actual, like, heart for the lymph system. Right? Blood moves because the heart pumps, squeezes, and pushes the blood around. But the lymph system has no actual pump that makes it work. So you might say, well, how does the lymph move? We'll talk more about that in a moment. The larger lymph vessels come together or come into or come through these lymph nodes, which I'm sure you've heard of those, right? You go to the doctor and they're feeling like, oh, your lymph nodes are swollen, or maybe you've noticed that when you are sick, or heard of people when they are dealing with, thank you, sir, appreciate it. When they're dealing with some breast surgery or cancer, we'll talk about the lymph nodes being involved. We'll talk more about those in a moment. And again, those larger things come in to form lymph trunks. So here's just a general look, all right? That looks very familiar, right? The heart diagram that you all basically learned. And they're just showing you addendum to that. Hey, the lymph system flows. Again, it's all about transport. If I was doing one unit on these last 3 chapters, I would just call it the transport unit because it's moving things throughout your body. Does that make sense? From the capillaries, the lymph capillaries, the vessels get bigger and bigger. They go through the little lymph nodes here, right? And then they're dumping it into these bigger vessels, which, again, dump back into the veins. More specific, we'll talk about that in a moment. The lymph nodes are actually a very specialized something. We'll talk more about them. There's special filters and other things that are there in the lymph nodes. The lymph trunks, lymphatic trunks, these are the biggest of the vessels, of these lymphatic vessels. Question? They actually don't into the vena cavas. I'll show you right where they dump in a moment here. This is subclavian, right up in this area. Yes, right. So when you get that blood that comes back into the right atrium to begin the process, right, that will also have lymph fluid in it as well. You're correct. And so again, these lymphatic trunks, they all join into these 2 collecting ducts, either the thoracic duct or the right lymphatic duct. The thoracic duct is here on the left side, and it drains all your left arm, and it runs all the way down the center of your body. And the right lymphatic duct drains here, your right arm mostly. And those are both dumping into the subclavian veins. Clave would be clavicle, right? Subclavian means under the clavicle, so there's a vein that runs right underneath your clavicle here. And that's where they dump into, which those then dump immediately, Ryan, right back into the superior vena cava. If you want to see the pictures, these pictures are in your textbook on page 390. Thank you. I blew them up bigger. They had them smaller here. I wanted to make sure you could see them. So here's the thoracic duct running all the way almost from the belly button all the way up and around this side, the left side of your body. It's a big area. It's a big, big duct. And again, that's like the major collecting. That would be like talking about the inferior vena cava or the superior vena cava, the big, big vessels of the lymphatic system. And then here's the right lymphatic duct right up here, almost right running with your clavicle. Again, dumping into these two subclavian veins, which dump right into the superior vena cava. And you see, where do you notice there are lots of these lymph nodes? Those are the wider little exaggerated portions. Where do you see these nodes at? Sorry? Joints. Yeah, be even more specific. Where do you see them at? Underarms, right? Elbow. Where else? Groin area, right? Hips, right? What do all those places have in common? They're warm, sure. There's some sensitivity. There's sweating there. Sure, certainly there are plenty of sweat glands there too. But go even bigger picture. You said joints. What's the purpose of joints? Movement, right? Movement. Because the question was, how do you get things to go, right? If there's no pump, how does a limb system move? It's because they're always right by these areas that are moving, and so it's the squeezing, it's the contracting, it's the movement that actually moves the lymph. Does that make sense? So therefore, you want those collecting areas right by areas of lots of movement. Yes, ma'am? It's a significant problem. You can have lymphedema. We'll talk about that. That they get these large swellings that fluid can't be moved. Massage. Yeah, they do massage. They have these like tights that they wear, leggings, that help prevent that swelling. Yeah. Sure, right. Physical therapists do a good bit of that. There's folks who specialize in lymphedema who would absolutely be working at that. Yes. Absolutely. So you notice that there are tons of lymph nodes here, right? Let me take this picture here. So if you have breast cancer, have problems in the breast, if that cancer is too invasive, they actually have to remove those lymph nodes as well. That's part of the staging of breast cancer, is whether it's involved in the lymph nodes. And if they have to do that, if they take those out, are you comfortable that can cause significant swelling and problems in that arm, like if it's your left breast in the left arm? Because you're not able to drain that fluid out as well. So again, they'd have to do things. There's massaging to do. There is these sleeves they can wear that will help with that. It can be a very large problem if these lymphatic vessels are involved. Make sense? I see some good head nods. Okay, let's talk about that fluid itself. So this interstitial fluid, the fluid that's around the cells, we don't actually call it lymph until it has actually entered a lymphatic capillary. Does it suddenly change and become like super fluid as soon as it comes in there? No, it's the same fluid. We're just calling it now lymph because it's in the lymphatic vessel. Does that make sense? So it's still made of the same stuff. It's still the same proteins and water and fluid. It's just now being collected and shunted back to your heart to, again, get circulated through your body and be used in all the ways that fluid is. Okay? So, how is it made? How is that fluid made? Again, it's made of mostly water and the dissolved substances, the proteins, the nutrients, these kind of things that leave the blood capillaries through diffusion, through that osmosis. And then during that filtration, some of the smaller proteins leak from the capillaries into the tissue, and they're not returned to the bloodstream. So therefore, you get this pressure that's building up, this osmotic pressure, right? Osmotic pressure causes the flow of what? Osmosis is the flow of water, right? We're dealing with water movement, okay? And it's all due to concentration, right? If I've got higher concentration of the solute, right, the thing that has been dissolved, on one side versus the other, you get the water to move to try and balance that out. And that's exactly what's happening in these lymph vessels. The rising osmotic pressure in those tissues keeps the fluid from going back into the blood. It just ends up staying out in that interstitial space. So therefore, it gets pushed into the lymph vessels. Because it's easier for them to go into the lymph vessels than it is to go back into the blood. Because again, there's no like director saying, okay, come on, you need to go into the lymph, come on, like shepherding them. No. It's just a simple osmotic pressure. It's pushing them, and it's much easier to go into the lymph vessels. Less pressure there, so it's easy to move in there. Does that make sense? All right. We talked about this briefly, but we'll continue on. How does the lymph move? Well, the hydrostatic pressure of that tissue fluid pushes the fluid into the vessels, right? And from there, you need other things to make that fluid actually move through the lymph system. So here are some things. Skeletal muscles. So if I've got the lymph in my arm, when I contract my elbow, I'm squeezing, right? Those lymph, remember you saw the lymph nodes that were right here. I'm squeezing that, and I'm squeezing the fluid back up toward my heart. Does that make sense? When I'm breathing, that breathing in, breathing out. You remember all of the different vessels, lymph vessels that were in your chest. That's going to move that fluid. As I have the contraction of the smooth muscle in the walls of the lymphatic trunks. So the big vessels of the lymph system actually have smooth muscle that will contract, again, to help move that fluid along. So you would actually have, so as a physical therapist, I would do this. You would actually have to come and move them. You would actually put their arms and legs through different range of motion. To, number one, help those joints not to get too stiff, but also to keep that movement, keep that fluid movement. Yeah. Does that make sense? What I want to make sure you understand is there is no pump for the lymph system. It simply has to be from the movement of these different body parts. Breathing, muscle contractions, etc. We cool? If you have something interfere with that movement, then that's what we call edema, lymphedema. During surgery, are you comfortable that surgeons are very interested in making sure you're not bleeding to death, right? This is a good thing. We don't want you to die from that. But the lymph vessels are often something, it's not really that big of a deal. Again, they're tough to see. You're not really worried about the lymph vessels. So if you've had a surgery and some of those lymph vessels are cut or damaged in some way, that can also lead to edema. Not always, but it has happened. I'll see somebody who's gone for a knee replacement, and they come out of surgery and their leg is just swollen, and we cannot get the swelling down. And it's not swollen because of an infection. It's swollen because there was damage to those lymph vessels, and the body has to kind of heal that or rework that, or maybe it's something they deal with their entire life. It just depends. Sometimes not. Yeah, it just depends. Well, sure, right. If you actually watch, and again, this is not to disparage surgeons, because what they do is impressive work. It's a carpenter shop. If you want to watch somebody do a knee replacement, if you just go on YouTube and watch a knee replacement, it's literally hammers and saws, and it is hard work. Excuse me, 1 second. Hello, it's Nathan. He's here. Yes, sorry. Tardy. Thank you. I always joke that's why I didn't become a surgeon, was because I can't cut straight. Like, it's really all about, man, it's so precise. But it's brutal. Like, they just are literally beating this hammer on this guy's knee to pound in the, it's impressive.
So lymph nodes don't go back?
They can, but they can be damaged, and depending on how bad that damage is, maybe they can't. Yeah. Okay. Yes, ma'am. That's a great question. Did you hear what she said? She said, can you get like donor lymph nodes or lymph vessels, what you're saying, right? I am not aware of anything like that. Yeah, I'm not aware of it, but again, I'm not a surgeon, so I don't know everything. But yeah, interesting. I don't know. I have to look that one up. It'll be very interesting to see. Okay, let's talk briefly about the lymph nodes, because I've lost a number of you here, so I'm going to try and keep working. I know it's hot, it's warm. You're tired of hearing me talking. It's life. I'm sorry. So why these lymph nodes are important for immunity is because they contain lymphocytes, and macrophages. And we'll talk more about what these guys are, but these are cells that are actively seeking to kill bad stuff, right? To get rid of the bacteria and the viruses and these things. So let's talk about the lymph node itself. You can usually feel, even if you're not sick, you can usually feel like right underneath here some of your lymph nodes. When you go to the doctor, right, they always want to feel this area if you're sick, right? So often, and again, they're kind of these little bean-shaped nodules that you can kind of feel. It's tough to point them out to you. Sometimes you can get some in your armpits. There's more tissue and stuff there. Sometimes it's harder to feel those guys. They have blood vessels. They have nerves. Let me show you the picture here. It's kind of divided, right? You can see that you have these little open areas, these little what they call sinuses, almost like little rooms. Here's like a little bean that's got lots of little rooms in it, right? And inside those rooms are these different macrophages and lymphocytes, or T cells in particular, are being made here. Here we go, sorry. And they kind of act like a filter. So remember that a lymph node is, here's a lymph vessel, right? And here's a lymph vessel. The lymph is flowing this way. It goes through that lymph node and then continues to pass on. So it's almost like a filter. I was going to use the Brita, but that may be too old. Do y'all know what I'm talking about when I say a Brita filter? Yeah, like a pitcher, right, that you put the water in the top, and then it goes through the filter, and then the water is on the bottom, right? That's exactly what these lymph nodes are doing. It's trying to filter out some of these bad things. Particularly, we're talking about the bacteria and the bad stuff by using these lymphocytes and macrophages to eat those guys up. So again, this is what it looks like, right? The flow coming in, going through the filter, and the flow coming out. So certainly by the time it gets all the way up to your heart again, you should have pretty well cleaned out all the bad stuff. Does that make sense? So then you're just basically dumping this nice fluid back into your heart to keep the volume of your blood up.
After it filters it, where does it start, or
Well, it would have been killed by these guys. Yeah, but those cells would actually attack and eat them up. A phage, right? A macrophage means a large eater, something that's eating something. Yeah. And again, where are they located at? Along the chain, lots of different places, especially in joints. Yes, ma'am. Sure, there are many other defenses other than just the white blood cells. Yeah, we'll talk more about those in this chapter. Yeah. How do they function? Again, we've talked about this, but I'm just saying it again. The macrophages and lymphocytes within the lymph nodes, they filter the lymph and they remove that bacteria and cellular debris before the lymph is returned to the blood. Make sense? And the lymph nodes are also centers of lymphocyte production. So they're actually producing these lymphocytes that become the T cells or the B cells, which we'll talk more about those as we move on. Here's your whole body showing where those lymph nodes are. Very few in the legs. Very few in the legs. They're much more concerned with just getting the lymph back up to the top. Lots of them in the groin area, through the abdomen, in the elbows, in the underarms, around your shoulders. A few up in your head, around your ears. Fairly widespread. Good. That's where I want to stop with you for today. Your questions are due Friday, right? So do make sure you spend some time there. Owen, would you mind going and grabbing those study guides again? We'll get those passed out.